When I did my first video on cocaethylene, aka the more potent and more dangerous drug that your body creates when you combine blow with drinking, people are like, yeah, silly scientists, that's why we all do it this way. But is it true that people all do it that way? Well, no. And it seems like there's a huge difference on the when people are taking these things together and the why people are taking these things together, but also the how of how you're using. A lot of this runs kind of counter to what us drug scientists think of as like more dangerous when it comes to addiction. So today I will explain to you all of these interactions between blow and alcohol. I'll explain how you take it and when you take it actually matters in terms of the danger and the likelihood of being able to quit. So if you're not one of those people who are like silly scientists, let me explain cocaethylene. And this is one of the most like fascinating ideas to me in neuroscience of drugs. So specifically cocaethylene is like, I picture it as like that volcano explosion in chemistry, right? So you have like these two tubes of different chemicals that look just like benign and innocuous when you first use them. So like just chemicals, they do nothing. But then when you pour them together, all of a sudden you got a volcano. That is basically cocaethylene in your body. So what happens normally when somebody just takes blow is that it breaks down in their body. It forms this metabolite known as benzoylecgonine, which is basically just this thing that becomes excreted. It's inactive. It doesn't do anything. However, if you are using blow at the same time as alcohol, that doesn't form. Instead, cocaethylene forms. And that's because when you have alcohol in your system, it can add kind of this like ethyl group to the molecule, and then it forms cocaethylene. Now, cocaethylene lasts longer in your system and is more potent. And because of this, has lots of problems. Now, the last time I did a video on this, people are like, yeah, more potent means better. More potent does not mean better. More potent means that, yeah, it's going to last longer in your system, and more potent means that you might feel more of the effects. But these are all of the effects. So these are effects like overdose. These are effects like you have an increase of psychosis and aggression. There are all sorts of problematic things like cardiovascular issues. It makes it far more likely that you're going to overdose and specifically have like a heart attack and require CPR resuscitation. And long-term alcohol use has a tendency to kind of prevent the formation of new neurons in your brain, especially in areas like your hippocampus. That's where a lot of our new neurons are formed, and that's dealing with memory. So alcohol has a tendency to kind of like cause those new neurons to not be formed. But what happens is that when you have alcohol and cocaine combined, yeah, they're even worse. And when we have alcohol and blow, both of those are things that are relatively easy to overdose on, alcohol in particular. Now, here's the thing. Most people are using these at the same time for the reason of it becoming more potent. Like we're talking about 3/4 of people who are using Coke actually use alcohol at the same time. But this depends on like what type of cocaine they're using, but also it depends on like when they're taking these two things together. Now, this interaction is only going to occur when this is simultaneous. So again, it is like forming this new drug in your system, so both have to be used at the same time. Now, at the same time is kind of not necessarily the best descriptor. A lot of people start kind of drinking and then have a few sessions of blow kind of in the middle of that. And they do that for a variety of reasons. So first, to produce cocaethylene and kind of make that high last longer. But second, so that they can be more sociable, so that drinking makes them more sociable. And then that's kind of the added social benefit of Coke. And then you have the third reason of alcohol is making you feel more tired. And so the other drug is kind of counteracting that tiredness. Now, this, by the way, is the same reason that people use caffeine at the same time as alcohol, because caffeine is actually masking those kind of like tiredness effects of alcohol. And that is also very dangerous. So an espresso martini makes you feel less drunk and you're more likely to drink more, and therefore you are more likely to get closer to that overdose level. For those of you who've heard of the Four Loko band, yeah, it was for that reason. I also like that there's a sentence in there that the scientists were like, yeah, and it seems like people are doing this for purposeful reasons. So yeah, back to that silly scientists. Of course we know that. That's why we're doing it. Yeah, it does seem like they know that, and that's why they're doing that. Now, there's another group of people who prefer to take blow first and then alcohol later. So they're doing this for completely different reasons in this case. They're saying this helps with like reducing the come down. It helps to maybe sleep. It supposedly helps reduce the cravings for cocaine. Now, have any of those been scientifically validated? No, not really. The only thing that we really for sure know is that yes, this new drug is more potent and lasts longer. And yes, it is more dangerous. In terms of like reducing cravings, we don't actually see that at all. The thing that I actually found most interesting in all of this is that crack users and powder users are incredibly different in terms of how they use this. So what we actually see is that people who are using powder cocaine, so this is more of like that pure version. By the way, crack and powder cocaine are almost identical chemically and almost identical in terms of what it's doing to your body biologically. Now, the different routes of administration change all sorts of things in terms of like addictive potential. So crack is more likely to be addictive because you're taking it in ways that you can feel a faster effect, and those are more likely to be addictive. And they're also kind of different groups of people. And what we see is that people who use crack, who are smoking, for example, they are less likely to actually drink more alcohol when they're going through a binge. So they typically will just binge on crack for long periods of time. And then at the end, they'll drink alcohol to hopefully kind of reduce those problems that they're having from the end of their crack binge, which again, we have no evidence that actually works. The powder users will drink more. And so it's actually potentially more dangerous for the powder users than for the crack users, even though this is kind of opposite of what we typically expect. And the different ways that people were using them actually produced different levels of cocaethylene as well. So there was a study in which they directly tested this. They got people who used cocaine. And they basically said, like, yep, you're just coming in to use this drug in different ways. So we're going to inject it intravenously. You can take it orally, and you can also smoke it. And then we're going to see how the levels of cocaethylene are different from one to another. And what they found was that that oral route, that was actually the route that led to the highest cocaethylene levels, which makes sense if you think about how this is actually happening. Like, your body is forming new metabolites. So we know that like intravenous is actually more dangerous because there's not really an easy way to counteract that and you feel the effects immediately. But here we see that the oral route is more likely to produce higher levels of cocaethylene, which could be more dangerous. Now, the other really interesting point from the how side of things is that people use these things for different reasons. So crack users were like, oh yeah, I drink at the same time to prevent the paranoia and to prevent the kind of coming down situation, where the powder users were like, yeah, it's just a social thing. Like, this is just what we do. So weirdly, like, social norms seem to be influencing this use too. Like, there's all sorts of weird things going on with cocaethylene. Now, here's the thing. We see that when it comes to quitting, if you've used this combination, you are way less likely to be able to quit. So you typically have more cravings, which makes sense because then each drug is going to cause a craving for the other drug. So if you're constantly pairing them together, those drugs become paired together in your brain. And so anytime you have blow, then you're like, oh, well, now I just kind of want to drink. Or anytime you have a drink, then you're like, well, now I just want blow. But what we do see is that this information might help us figure out how to navigate quitting for different types of people. So for example, the social implications might be more important for people who are using it when they're like snorting, so more of the powder cocaine. And using it at different times can predict why people are using it too. And if we know why people are using it, maybe we can start working on some of the underlying factors of what leads to addiction instead of just like, I don't know, penalizing people for drug use in the first place. Because one of the things that really helps people quit is figuring out why they were using it in the first place and tackling some of those issues instead of just treating them like an addict.